Welcome back to Veggie Vero's Kids Corner. I'm your host, Veronica Green. I'm back today at the Delray Beach Children's Garden. It's a beautiful, breezy day, and I have a really great story to read you. So this book is called Daniel Finds a Poem. The author is named Micha Archer. And I chose this book because when I was growing up, poetry was one of my favorite things. I used to love writing rhyming poems. That was my thing. I loved to try to make words rhyme together and tell stories through rhyming poetry. But of course, poems don't have to rhyme. So we're going to take a look at how this character in the story, Daniel, puts together his poem. And then we're going to look at some nature items that I found here in the garden to try to see how we can draw inspiration from nature to write our own poetry. All right, so everybody cozy, you ready? Let's get started. Daniel knows all of the rocks, trees, and animals in the park. What animals do you see? On Monday, Daniel sees something new on the park gate. It's a sign that reads Poetry in the Park, Sunday at 6 o'clock. What is poetry? Daniel says. He looks up in surprise when he hears a spider say, "To me, poetry is when morning dew glistens." On Tuesday, Daniel climbs the old oak tree. He sees a squirrel, and he looks at the squirrel and says, "Excuse me, Mr. Squirrel, do you know what poetry is?" "Poetry is when crisp leaves crunch," said the squirrel. On Wednesday, Daniel calls into Chipmunk's hole. "Oh, Chipmunk, can you please tell me what poetry is?" Poetry? Poetry is a home with many windows in an old stone wall, says the chipmunk. On Thursday, Daniel makes a boat with a leaf for a sail and watches the wind carry it across the pond. He calls quietly to the frog. "Excuse me, frog, what is poetry?" "Poetry," says Frog, "is a cool place to dive." On Friday, Daniel parts the cattails and calls Turtle. "Oh, Turtle, I have a question for you. What is poetry?" "I think poetry is sun-warmed sand," says Turtle. Sun-warmed sand. On Saturday afternoon, Daniel finds Cricket in the shade of the slide. When the shadows are long, Cricket fills the air with music. "Is this poetry to you?" he asks Cricket. "Singing at twilight when the day is done? Indeed it is, Daniel." That night, moonlight fills Daniel's room. Leaning towards the window, he hears a "Hoo!" Daniel calls out to Mr. Owl, "Owl, can you tell me what poetry is?" "Oh, poetry," says Mr. Owl. "Poetry is bright stars in the branches, moonlight on the grass, and silent wings to take me wherever I go." "Good night, dear Daniel," he whispers, and flies off into the night. On Sunday, the sun wakes Daniel up. He is happy when he remembers that it's Sunday. "Today is poetry in the park," says Daniel, "and I have a poem." So Daniel goes to the park and reads his poem bravely to the crowd. Morning dew glistens, crisp leaves crunch. There's a home with many windows in the old stone wall. Cool pools to dive in, sun-warmed sand to lie in, singing at twilight when the day is done. Bright stars in the branches, moonlight on the grass, and silent wings to take me wherever I go. On the way home, Daniel stops to watch the sunset reflecting in the pond. "That looks like poetry to me," he says. "To me too," says Dragonfly. The end. Wow, what a beautiful story. Do you all feel inspired to write a poem? I really think that this is a great reminder to try to just kind of appreciate the natural beauty that's all around us and try to find the poetry, Mother Nature's poetry that really is all around us every day. Sometimes we take these things for granted. So I pulled a couple of nature items from right here in the garden, and these are just things actually that I found on the floor. The first one is a leaf. This is actually a leaf from our mango tree, and when I look at it, I see all of these little tiny veins, every single little vein perfectly spaced apart in a pattern, and it reminds me that nature is art. There's artwork found in nature, and all of the textures and patterns, they really are like poetry. So if I wanted to use just this single mango leaf to start my first line of a poem, I might say something like, veins in a leaf are the skin of the earth, because in our skin we have our own veins, right? And our own lines and creases. So the veins in a leaf are like the skin of the earth. That's just an example, of course. And then I also found this tropical almond seed. This is a seed which was edible, but this one is dried out. But something like this reminds me that food that the earth provides us can be and should be recycled. After we eat the food and there's a seed left behind, we can plant that seed to grow more food. So it's kind of like Mother Nature's way of recycling. So I would maybe use this seed as inspiration to write in my poem. Maybe the next line would say something like, "The seeds of what used to be make way for new life." Something like that, yeah? And then I found this little flower on the floor. It had fallen off of the plant where it was growing. And It's a pretty deep flower. It has the little hole that goes all the way in. It's hard to see it on the camera because it's kind of wilting already, but it reminds me of secret hiding places. Like a little fairy would live in there. So maybe I would say something like, flower petals, secret tunnels for life of all shapes and sizes. Because also the bees, right? The bees pollinate in the flowers, butterflies come and sip the nectar. So much inspiration can be drawn from just the most simple items that you can find in your own backyards. So give it a try. If you get a chance to write any nature poems, please share them. I would love to hear them. I actually miss writing poems, and this is making me want to get back to it. So thank you so much for listening to this story, and thank you to the author, Micha Archer, for writing such a lovely book. I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you next time on Veggie Vero's Kids Corner.